where we're going to talk. The speaker is going to be Naomi. She works as a software development software development engineer at Adobe in New York City, where she leads internationalization on her team. Before writing JavaScript full time, Naomi worked as a teacher in local classrooms across Asia and West Africa. Wow. You are passionate about developing with diversity, inclusion, and internationalization in mind, and enjoys hiking and riding bikes on the weekends. You are a very active person. Wow, woman. Nice to meet you, Naomi.
Thanks. Good to meet you too.
Thank you. And your talk, it's going to be about some useful techniques to customize data visualization in Vue and focus on a global audience, right? And explaining how colors, iconography, and emojis can be perceived differently in distinct cultures. I think everyone might have a little knowledge about colors, but not so much about icons and emojis. It might be a big difference. And just one thing that you told me, it is the pet curiosity thing. So we had it on our first talk, and we need to have for our last talk. So Naomi, she has both a cat and a dog, right? And you
That's right.
assured me that they are awesome work from home furry co-workers.
Yes, they're both sitting next to me right now.
Oh my gosh, I want to see them. I hope they jump around at some point in the questions and answers. Well, your talk is going to be pre-recorded, correct?
Correct.
And I am very excited about it since I never actually studied the topic of data visualization in depth. So it's going to be new information for me. Thank you
Awesome.
very much. And we will come back for the questions. Please make sure to leave your questions on the chat so we can ask by the end of the recording session, okay? We'll come back soon. Welcome to the talk, Data Visualization and Internationalization by Naomi.
Awesome. Thanks. Hello, View Day 2020. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be joining you all virtually, even though it would have been lovely to be in Italy together. So, my name is Naomi Meyer, and I work as a software development engineer at Adobe on the globalization team, where I handle internationalization and localization of Creative Cloud products. Currently, I'm working primarily on Adobe fonts and Behance. So, I have been thinking a lot lately about data visualizations and the intersection with data viz and internationalization, or I18N. And especially, we as a world have seen recently that data visualizations can be a very powerful international communication tool. With the global pandemic, we've witnessed the power of this example, the flatten the curve visualization that can really effectively communicate a story and share critical information that's often used in the context of news, science, raw data, internationally across languages, borders, cultures. So I think that DataViz is a very powerful tool, but it's important to think deeply about the cultural implications to ensure that this critical data and the stories we're telling this with the data is not misperceived or mistranslated by diverse audiences from around the world. So here's another example of kind of what I'm talking about. I'm sure we've all seen visualizations like this recently, and this is, published on The Guardian, a news site, and it looks good, right? Well, if we go into the browser and we translate into Chinese, we can see some internationalization issues. So first we have numbers. Numbers and integers are very important, need to be handled correctly across each distinct locale. And colors. Colors can have different cultural significance that can really vary across regions. And I think that's important to keep in mind for kind of human-centered design. And dates and times. These need to be formatted correctly across regions. And if we go into the browser and we translate into Arabic, we can see some right to left language challenges that should be addressed. So that's kind of our agenda for today. We're going to start with definitions just to level set and make sure we're all on the same page. Then we'll move to numbers, dates and times, right to left, and some bi-directional data visualizations. Then we'll talk about iconography and the use of emoji. And finally, we'll end on color. So overall, the aim of internationalizing our data viz are to create experiences that are equally usable, relevant, and meaningful for users all across the globe to really amplify the voices of our global users. And there's some really exciting JavaScript visualization frameworks like D3 and Vega and view-specific tools. But I'm not going to get into those view-specific frameworks and tools today. Instead, I want to focus on solutions that can easily carry across frameworks and kind of big ideas that we can keep in mind across all JavaScript. So my goal is to really encourage and invite you all, my fellow Vue JavaScript developers, to try and avoid assumptions and to think more globally about how to build our data in the form of visualizations for the whole World Wide Web. So this is a paradigm that we often use on my team at Adobe, where we start with translation, the most granular level, or T9N, where hello becomes hola, konnichiwa, bonjour. And then we move to localization, where we get into more depth on locale-specific practices. So, an easy way to think of localization is in the US, we're spelling it with a Z, as English as spoken in the US. If we hop across the pond to London in the UK, we're going to spell localization with an S. And they're both English, but they're different locales or regional dialectic variations. So that's part of, that's taken into account as in the process of localization. Next, we have internationalization, or I18N, and that's where we really prepare the full app. We take all our hard-coded English strings and wrap them in a container so that they can be shipped out for translation. And these three kind of fall under the umbrella of globalization, or G11N. And I like this paradigm, but the more I think about it, I think there's sort of a greater, higher order component that these fall under. And that's accessibility and innovation, because culture is deeply rooted in our thinking patterns. And culture affects how our users interact with and benefit from digital experiences. So internationalization really goes way beyond translation. And by acknowledging cultural characteristics and celebrating differences, we're creating with innovation. So another way to think about this is if we look at these two data viz, they kind of tell a different story. We can see clearly that the majority of people on Earth do not speak English as their first language. Whereas in the pie chart, we can see that the majority of digital content on the internet is in English. So I think this is really an opportunity to improve and expand digital content to different languages and data visualizations. So let's talk about how we can do that. Let's start with numbers around the world. So I love this visualization, this representation of how numbers can really vary around the world. And I look at it and I think numbers are beautiful. So instead of hard coding a number, what we can do is use the native JavaScript API, the INTL object, to create a reusable formatter instance of a number. And this supports locale-aware number formatting. And since it's enabled creating a reusable formatter instance, it's more efficient than other methods. So if we input this long number of 123 plus trillion, and we display it across a variety of locales, we can see some differences. So in English, we see a comma every third integer. In German, there's a period. Russian, there's a space. And then in Tamil and Hindi, we can see a comma at a different location within the number. And that's because of different number ordering systems. So for displaying a number, it's good to think about how that might be perceived across different number systems. So here's another example of some internationalization functionality in the Gapminder example visualization here. So if we go and we translate into Russian, it looks good, right? Well, there's a little bug on the axis here where 16,000, 32,000, and 64,000 have been shortened with a K for 1,000, which is what we do in English. But that's not the correct way to shorten 16,000 in Russian. You need to use the Russian locale-specific symbol. So JavaScript to the rescue, we can pass in this optional parameter as notation compact. And this is recommended instead of hard coding. And when we pass in notation compact across this wide variety of locales, we can see some really cool differences. So there's the correct shortening of trillion in Russian, and again, some different number ordering systems and all of these variety of locale-specific symbols. In addition to notation compact, there's another option to pass notation as scientific, and here we're passing the style of unit and the unit as meter per second, and I think this is a great solution to use for COVID scientific data visualizations to ensure that these locale-specific symbols are included in each of the numbers. And there's also notation engineering. And there's a link for more information. I'm really excited about this addition to the INTL object from Matthias Baynerds and Shane Carr from Google. So, shout out to them for the awesome work they're doing. And here's an example of a correctly localized data viz in Japanese, where the units are formatted into Japanese directly. So let's move on to dates and times around the world. So time zones. Most data visualizations do include time, and time zone conversion is notoriously confusing in computing. And that's why I like this representation, because it's bright and jarring and hard on the eyes, just like time zones. So here we can see the 25 nautical time zones that are separated by lines of longitude. And most time zones on land have a standard time offset from UTC, or Coordinated Universal Time, by a whole number. So UTC plus 8, UTC minus 12. But several are offset by 30 minutes or 45 minutes from the nearby hourly offset. And then if that's not hard enough, time zone is not always equal to offset from UTC, because many time zones have more than one offset due to daylight saving times or summer times rules. So this is a common bug that we see in graphs and times in a data visualization. If we're displaying now or the current time for a user, you want to make sure that time is correct. And then the age-old question, what day is it today? Is it January 2nd or February 1st? In 2021, when hopefully the world will be better, hopefully. So to answer this question, I think it's important to think about some history. So in 1995, Brendan Eich had 10 days to write JavaScript in order to get it into Netscape. And he had orders to make it like Java. So he copied the java.util.date implementation from Java, which was terrible. And it was later replaced in Java 1.1 in 1997. But it has not been replaced in JavaScript yet. So that's why JavaScript has some really weirdness with dates and times. So there is a TC39 proposal called the Proposal Temporal. And here's the link. I am so excited about this proposal because it creates a global object as a top-level namespace object like math. That would be the temporal object, and it brings modern date-time API to the ECMAScript language. So here's just a screenshot from their documentation where you can kind of play around with it. And here I'm doing temporal.now.time, temporal.now.date, and here you can see the time zone correctly represented and a lot of really exciting new additions there. So I hope as a JavaScript community we can make this happen because we really need it. Here's an addition to the INTL object that is currently cross-browser compatible, and this is the format range. So we can pass in a JavaScript date as a start date and an end date, and then format the range between those days. And here's how that looks for January 1st to February 2nd. January 2nd to February 1st, 2021. And again, just the locale specific symbols and the wide variety of how dates are expressed across the world makes me smile. And then on the bottom, we can see that in Arabic, Hebrew, and Farsi, some of that bi-directional number character system happening. So let's jump into that with right to left around the world. So there are many right to left languages. Arabic is the 5th largest language in the world. And if you add other right to left languages like Pashto, Urdu, Farsi, Kurdish, Hebrew, and more, there are many hundreds of millions of native right to left speakers. So by supporting right to left and thinking about it in your apps, you're going to enable these users to have a really positive experience. So this is a story that's often told in the context of right to left, and I'm not even 100% sure if it's true or not, but the story goes that some Coca-Cola advertisers went to Saudi Arabia and they drew up this storyboard, and they were coming from a Western context, a left to right context. So they thought of the story, it would go, someone's, lying in the desert, they drink Coca-Cola, and then they're happy and running. But they forgot that in Saudi Arabia, the folks actually think and read right to left. So the story actually was interpreted by their users as someone's running in the desert, they drink Coca-Cola, and then they're lying on the ground. So this is a total right to left fail, and this is what you want to avoid. So another example is this cute infographic from Lebanon, where we can see all of the text there is reading right to left, and then the infographic, the story of this viz, starts on the green and moves over there to the red. And it's really a mental shift. Right to left users will typically look at the top right, whereas left to right users will typically look to the top left of the page. And this is true for characters and letters, but numbers are handled differently. So this is an example of the bi-directional numbers or bi-di numbers from Muriel Schottlaender at Wikipedia. And she clearly shows here that in English and other monodirectional languages, the text and characters are reading left to right, and then the numbers are also left to right. But in this Hebrew example, the text is, I always get confused here. The text is reading right to left, but then the numbers are left to right. And so there's two directions happening simultaneously in the same line. And then in that second example, if we include English, and that's common, with user-generated content, we can have English numbers and letters reading left to right alongside Hebrew letters that are right to left, and then Hebrew numbers that should be left to right. So multi-directions happening simultaneously. Here's an example of how that looks in a data visualization. So we can see a Hebrew language 5th grade math book. And highlighted there are the bidirectional numbers happening. And then the mathematical notation. There is the math is left to right, but then the description of it next to it is right to left. And here's another example of a high school calculus book from Jordan. And everything is reading right to left, including the Eastern Arabic numerals and that square root sign there that's kind of mirrored that I think is super cool. And another example in Hebrew where the X and Y axes have been changed, and then everything on the page is reading right to left. And this final example is from the Maldives Anti-Corruption Commission. And while the X and Y axes are left to right, if you look at the story, the chronology of the data viz, blue is 2018 and green is 2017. So it's kind of intended to be read and to be consumed right to left. So the more I look at these data viz in right to left and bidirectional, my mind is just blown. And I think it's so fascinating to handle correctly in our data visualizations and to really avoid our assumptions about X and Y axes and direction of numbers and characters. Here's one example of Kent Dodd's RTL, right to left CSS and JS library that can help, but there's other awesome libraries out there. So let's move on to iconography around the world. So all iconography and imagery is closely related to society, culture, beliefs, and political values. So that's why it's so important to be careful and intentional when selecting images for different regions. These examples are from the Adobe design system called Spectrum, and they show that when you're selecting images that include people, it's important to pick pictures of folks who are dressed appropriately for the region, and to remember that the definition of what is appropriate can really vary across regions. And this picture of the feet, this would represent kind of relaxation in the United States, but in Southeast Asia, and particularly Thailand, it's considered very rude and offensive to display the soles of your feet. So this would not be an appropriate image in Thailand. So overall, with all images, I think it's important to be respectful and aware of different traditions and manners and then act accordingly. So in a past life, I worked as an English teacher in Japan. And when I first started, I was marking my students' homework. And I grew up in the United States, so I'm used to using a check mark to indicate that something is correct. But I quickly learned, my students' parents called me and they said, "Oh no, why is this wrong?" Because in Japan, instead of using a check mark to indicate correct, you use a circle to indicate something is correct. So I had to go back and quickly fix everyone's homework. But that introduces the question, what is the correct symbol to indicate correct or indicate incorrect? And that can really vary. Sometimes it's a check, sometimes it's a circle, sometimes it's an X. And that's something you really want to get correct. So speaking of emojis, emojis are really fascinating because they're these little pictures that are used across billions of devices, across every language online around the world. And so there's some really fascinating research coming out about emoji usage. And this one is a study from Ben Medlock of SwiftKey Keyboards and Gretchen McCullen, the author of the book Because Internet. And it's called The Linguistic Secrets Found in Billions of Emojis. So they found these 4 emoji categories were used more heavily in certain languages. So heart emojis are used 4 times more by French speakers than any other language. Paris is the city of love. Flower emojis were used 4 times more by Arabic speakers than any other language. And then drug emojis are used most in Portugal, Portuguese, and Australian English. And Santa emojis are used most in Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish. Another fascinating study is this one where authors hypothesized that respondents would perceive the emotional meaning of these 9 emoji differently across gender and age variants. And they found this to be true. For the unamused faced, older and younger people perceived it differently. And the face screaming in fear had an age variant, and the face with rolling eyes they found to have a gender variant. Also, talking about emoji, it's important to be knowledgeable about the cultural context. And the meaning of emoji can really change across time. So I'm sure this is no surprise that we've seen a significant uptick in the face with mask and the microbe emoji recently. And then, important to remember that emoji are kind of like fonts. They can really vary across platforms. So here's the microbe emoji, on Apple, Google, Samsung, etc. And my personal favorite is the WhatsApp version. I think it looks kind of fun. And then again, the uptick in certain emojis based on social things happening in time. So we've seen the emojis of the Black Lives Matter movement increase significantly. And that makes me want to share a resource. So here is the Anti-Defamation League's database called the Hate on Display database. And they list a number of symbols and some emoji, like Pepe the Frog or the OK hand symbol, which have been kind of co-opted by hate groups. And that's why I think it's really important to be aware of these tools and to do your homework to make sure that you're not accidentally displaying a symbol or using an image that will have alternative meanings that you don't intend. So this is a great resource to double check. So let's move on to color. Color is a major factor in creating effective data visualizations, but colors have different meanings and cultural significance around the world. So who remembers the great dress debate of 2015? This was a social media controversy where half of the internet saw the dress as blue and black and the other half saw it as gold. So this really made us more acutely aware of our brain's processing and the neuroscience of color and vision. So in the book, The Secret Lives of Color, Kasia St. Clair says that color should be understood as subjective cultural creations. And I could totally talk your ear off about different color meanings across cultures, but let's look at some really kind of extreme clear examples to paint this picture. So the color red. In a Western context, red is a color often used for warnings, error messages, stop signs. But in traditional Chinese culture, red is a color associated with wealth, prosperity, and good luck. So here we can see a traditional Chinese wedding ceremony where the bride is wearing red, and red envelopes that are used during the Chinese New Year to pass money. So red is really a good luck, happy, wealth color. And then in the middle, we can see red has a different meaning in the ancient Inca tradition. Here we see the ancient Inca deity Mama Huoco, who is said to have emerged from the cage of origin wearing a red dress. Also the color white. So here's an image of a Hindu funeral where the family members of the person who have died are wearing white, and a traditional Chinese funeral where the family members are wearing white. And so white in some cultures is for birth and life, and in some cultures is for death and funerals. Also the color purple. So here the Pope dresses the Vatican in purple for Lent. And then there's this story that Julius Caesar, after his son was born with Cleopatra, he wore Tyrian purple robes. And then laws were passed that only emperors were allowed to wear purple, and anyone else seen wearing purple could face death. So because of that, in parts of Italy, the story goes that the color purple is associated with bad luck. So we have the tools in our CSS toolbox to define different color themes or color modes. And here we can see dark mode and light mode defined using color variables. We also have the tools in our toolbox to define different languages. So here is just a simple example HTML markup where we have a lang tag. And we can target that lang tag using the lang pseudo class or the lang selector. And this is an example that's commonly used where we're loading new font families, to load new fonts for different languages. But technically, it is possible to, instead of loading additional fonts, or in addition to loading additional fonts, we could load different colors, different color themes, different colored modes, to really make our design human-centered and to acknowledge and celebrate different cultural meanings. So overall, we're going to end on this function that is internationalizing our data visualizations for a global audience of users will really return improved experiences and amplified voices of our international users. So please join me, avoid your assumptions, broaden your mind, and build for the full World Wide Web. Thank you so much.
That's all. And I'm sure it's not only me. This was a wonderful, amazing, fantastic time of information. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
I simply loved all the knowledge that I just took in right now. And I'm sure, guys, you are with me. Please comment on the chat if you are feeling the same way I am. Thank you very much, Naomi. We don't even have questions. We just want to know more. Tell me more. Tell me more. Wow. It's incredible. Please, everyone, rate her talk and the other talks before. Don't forget to do that so they get some feedback on what they can improve for the next talks. Naomi, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think I've done this talk a few times now, but I think especially right now with COVID-19 and the pandemic, we're seeing how data visualizations are really powerful international communication tools. And so I hope that, as developers, we can continue to think about the international audience that we're serving, to make sure that these data visualizations and the stories that we're telling with data can be translated across the world.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And also, I don't know, many of you maybe never experienced that, but when you move to the other side of the world, as I did, you find out that certain gestures, they can have totally different meanings. It can actually offend people. So you should always be careful, Oh, I think we got the question now. How should you approach dark mode in different cultures since black/dark colors are interpreted differently as well?
That's an interesting question. I personally, I'm biased. I enjoy using dark mode, like with my text editor and my terminal, because I think it's easier on my eyes. And I'm not familiar with, I guess, different cultural significance of dark mode or light mode inside an application. So that would be something that now I'm interested. Now I want to do some more research to find out.
Yeah, we have also like the high contrast technique for accessibility and everything that we have been using, but I don't think anyone ever took like this cultural matter into it.
Yeah, I think it's good to enable the user to change. And I know it's extra work on the coding side, and you're declaring your CSS variables, but I'm a huge advocate of really human-centered design. So if your user wants to use a dark mode or a light mode theme, then give them that option.
Yeah, all we can do is just allow. We hope that the companies start having this user-centric mindset as well, not only the developers. We try to push it, but sometimes we get a little stop. I don't know if the
Absolutely.
sign can be offensive anywhere. Now I'm afraid of doing any sign. I don't want to do anything anymore.
Yeah, and a big part of like data visualizations and internationalization, it is a business decision. You know, whether your product serves a global market, um, that's not always for the developer to decide. It's kind of above our pay grade. But I think it's important as we're developing these tools and building just to keep in mind and to avoid those assumptions. You know, like the right to left and the bi-directional numbers. That
Yes.
was my first time learning about it. And so I wanted to share because I think it's so fascinating, and I'm in a very monodirectional bias. So thinking in a totally different way, I think is good for people.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Bias, maybe it's the word we have been hearing a lot in different contexts, and everyone has one. That's a proof. As developers, we have our own biases and assumptions, definitely. Wow, thank you very much. I am not sure if we have any more questions come in as we have the delay, but
Can I share one thing about emojis?
please, you're gonna show me your
This
pets.
is new since I recorded the talk last week. Um, so Unicode is the consortium that approves new emojis and new scripts included um, as character encodings. And so they recently introduced the next batch of emojis that are now available in Android. And some of them are really exciting. They have the transgender flag, and they have like a few gestures, like the pinched hand gesture.
Adorable. Oh, that's so amazing.
So the cool thing about emoji is that they are dynamic and changing, and can vary based on the current time, and anyone can propose a new emoji. So if you go on the Unicode website, you can submit a proposal for a new emoji and it will be considered. I mean, it is a long process, but I think that's something that some people don't know about, is that if you have a good idea for emoji, go out there and make it happen.
You can be an emoji contributor. How awesome is that? It's not only open source contributor, you can be an emoji contributor.
Absolutely.
That's exciting. I'm not gonna lie.
It is. And then billions of people all across the world can have that one little icon. And it's
Wow.
not just the part of the reason why I'm so fascinated by emoji is because it's not just about like what you ate for lunch. It's sort of a digital acknowledgement of culture and of different cultures. There was a woman in, I forgot where exactly, but she is a woman who wears a headscarf, and she said, I really want a emoji that looks like me. And so she went through the process, submitted to Unicode, and she got the headscarf emoji included in Unicode, and had more of her culture included. And so I think that as a global community using digital devices, that's something that is important.
Wow. I am amazed. Okay, you did not only blow my mind with the talk, but after the talk. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Well, thanks for your enthusiasm. I appreciate it.
Oh, let me see if any question just popped up. No, it seems like it's okay. It's the Italian universal sign, definitely the hand. We need to, yeah, it is Italian. But apparently, not all Italians like to receive that emoji for some reason.
Yeah, and people are talking about different emoji on different devices, and that's absolutely true. I had the slide of the microbe emoji and how it can vary across emoji providers or kind of like fonts. So that was actually a big controversy because recently there was an effort to include both a female emoji, a male emoji, and sort of a human or person emoji that's kind of more gender neutral as the default, and then allow the user to select whether they want the man or the woman or the human emoji. And they had an issue with, there was an old emoji that was a woman breastfeeding. And so to make that more gender neutral, they changed it to person bottle feeding a baby. And then you can use man bottle feeding a baby or woman bottle feeding a baby. But the different providers aren't completely on the same page yet with how they represent that. So like if you use that emoji on Facebook, it's going to look very different than if you use it on Twitter or an Apple device.
Yeah, that is a issue. Like when we have different devices. I mean, I have Android phone and a Windows computer. They already look all messed up. They're completely different. So it's like my black representation is not a representation in one of them, you know?
So hopefully that will improve in the future, but it is definitely an issue right now.
Yeah, that is an issue right now. Naomi, thank you so much.
Thank you
I
for
think we're
having
going to
me.
wrap up, but I hope everyone got your tweet account so they can bug you a little bit and ask more questions.
Definitely. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
I will come for you. Please be sure for that. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thanks. Take care.